My name is Jason,
And I'm Sean.
and we're in the Brooklyn Tech Environmental Science Lab.
As you can see, we're surrounded by several plants and a couple of animals.
Yes, and when you hear about, well, speaking about plants and animals, let's think about the environment a little bit, right? When you think of the environment, you might also think about a lot of the environmental issues that we face.
Like climate change, deforestation, pollution.
Yeah, and those are like the most popular ones. Most of us have heard of those.
Oh, definitely.
What about, let's talk about a bit of a lesser known but still equally as important, if not more important issue
What that might
called
be.
overfishing. Have you heard of that before?
Oh, yeah, I have. I mean, as the name suggests, overfishing is an excess of fishing, and while it seems simple enough to grasp, it actually encompasses a lot of issues such as the economy and the environment.
Yeah, exactly. Well, when most people think of environmental issues, overfishing isn't quite the first thought that people have. However, it's really important, right? Because you might be thinking, well, it doesn't sound that hard to fix, right? It's just stop fish less, right? But it's not quite that easy. And would you know why?
Oh, maybe there aren't a lot of solutions to it?
Well, there's a lot of solutions. However, the thing is, it's just very hard to implement, right? Because with our new technologies, it's so easy to catch as many fish as possible, process them, store them on the ship. So there's a virtually limitless amount of fish that a fisherman can catch. But the issue isn't just people fishing too much; it's also them fishing species that they don't mean to fish and killing off other species. So, have you ever heard of a term called bycatch?
Bycatch. Oh, it's when they catch unintended fish, like you just said.
Yeah, exactly. So bycatch is when you catch something that is a byproduct of you fishing something else. And with our mass fishing practices, such as trawl netting, we always have tons of bycatch, especially in big fish fishing. So when you think of big fish, what do you think of?
Maybe just like a large scale operation, and you know how companies operate, they often do a little bit of scheming things.
Yeah, exactly. Well, but big fish refer to like tuna and salmon,
Oh.
and
I want to do that.
no, and then with
I thought you were going to go
I
into the
know.
regulations part. Oh man.
with big fish, oftentimes other big animals are also affected, such as whales, dolphins, and sharks. You might have picked up a can of tuna, right, and saw that there's a little tiny circular label and it says dolphin free, and you might have wondered what that meant. The way they catch tuna is they use these giant circular nets and they corral all these tuna into one go and they scoop them up. However, you scoop up a lot of things, and in a lot of cases, you scoop up a lot of dolphins, right? And so back before we had these dolphin-free certifications, we could have been eating dolphin in our tuna. There was definitely a huge likelihood of us that happening. And well, thankfully now that's gone down. However, just because our tuna is dolphin-free doesn't mean that these dolphins aren't getting killed. Now it just means that these dolphins are being removed from our fish, from the fish we're eating. And with bycatch, you might be wondering, wouldn't there just be regulations?
Oh, definitely. Surely the U.S. or other large suppliers of fish have implemented some kind of system to prevent this, no?
Yeah, you would really think that these big companies or these big governments implement these regulations. However, you have to think it's super difficult to implement these because they're not easy to enforce. Because in the vast open ocean, even with the Coast Guard, you can only be patrolling so much area in so much time. So big corporations and big fisheries are just able to just do whatever they want in a way. There are actually policies already that say you have to report the amount of bycatch you have.
And do they work?
See, not really. Here's why. It's because what do you think happens to all the bycatch?
You just said they get released into the ocean, right?
See, it's not that easy, unfortunately. These bycatch, a lot of times they end up dying while they're being pulled onto the ship. And because they're dying, and obviously the ships don't want to report that they got these fish because obviously they're going to face some penalties or consequences. And honestly, if I could get away with any penalties or consequences, I'd choose to not get away with
Me
it.
too.
Yeah, and so what they do is they take the bycatch and they just throw it over the edge. Because once it's thrown over the edge of the boat, it can't be tracked back to them. And so they're very much just throwing their problems out the window. And this isn't helping us at all. And speaking of helping the issue, one fun, or maybe even not so fun fact would be the United States actually got rid of their overfishing problem. But you might be wondering, how is that not a fun fact? Isn't that like a really good thing? And while it sounds like a really good thing on paper, doesn't it? It sounds
Definitely.
great. Like this like huge world power such as the United States got rid of their problem. That means other nations can do the same. And you would think that, and I thought that too at first, but unfortunately, that's just not the case. Because as the United States put on harsher and harsher policies, and what they did is they lowered the amount of national production of fish. However, the amount of fish we're eating actually went up. So you might be wondering, if the US isn't catching this fish, who is? And that's the problem. Because instead of the US catching this fish, foreign countries such as Japan, China, and Indonesia are filling in this gap. And so you might be wondering, well, if other countries do what the United States did, all of this world's fishing demand is going to end up falling under the little guys, and the little guys are going to have to overfish. So basically what the US did is they're just blaming others. And you know what the US does, they love blaming China, right? And well, so it's not even close to a situation. And let me tell you a little bit of a story right now, it's relevant, a little sidetrack. In the 1600s, European North Atlantic fishermen reported that the ocean was teeming with Atlantic cod. In fact, that you could just scoop your hand into the water and you would be sure to encounter fish. That's how abundant they were. And then by 1992, the Atlantic cod population had dropped to just a mere 1% of historic amounts. In just 300 to 300 years, the population dropped from this massive, huge population down to, the tiniest amount. And that number is only going lower. I think, and speaking of that, you might be thinking that's kind of old, right? 1992, that was 100 years ago now, right? But let's think of something more relevant. I don't know if you've heard of this, but you remember in Maine how they canceled some a crab event because
a billion crabs.
a billion crabs just disappeared. They don't know where they went, right?
And to emphasize how big a number that is, a billion is like 1,000 million. Man.
Exactly. You might be thinking a million is a lot, but now think of 1,000 of them. They're just gone. We don't know what happened to them. And you know what? Likewise, a lot of ocean species are just gone. And unfortunately, we know what happened to them. It's us as humans, we decimated their populations.
So we see how difficult this is to address, and it's pretty cyclic. One country sanctions something, and then overfishing still becomes prevalent because it's turned to elsewhere. So how does this affect us? I mean, we know the oceans are declining, but how, more ways than one, does it affect us?
Well, let's think about it. Have you ever eaten fish before?
Definitely.
Do you eat fish often? Yeah. Well, I do too. See, some people be like, well, I don't eat fish. I don't eat fish often. I don't like fish. Well, sure, right? But billions of people on the world eat fish regularly, and they rely on fish as a food source. And without this fish, not only are you losing a huge food source for a lot of people, you're losing 47.5 million jobs and a $279 billion industry. And that's a huge economic factor. And if you think about it, you always hear about politicians saying, hey, people are stealing our jobs, hey, I'm going to create more jobs, right? Now think about what's going to happen when 37.5 million people don't have a job anymore. That's going to create a huge economic impact, potentially even an economic collapse. And likewise, you heard how the human population hit 8 billion recently?
It was a scary thing.
Yeah, 8 billion. And by the year 2050, which is 27 years from now, the human population expected to hit 10 billion. And a lot of days, living in New York, we see this. We see a lot of people go hungry. We see a lot of homeless people. We see a lot of people who don't have food. It's already hard enough to feed 8 billion people. But can you imagine how hard it's going to be to feed 10 billion? And now think about it like this. With fish being a huge food source, not only are we going to need to feed 2 billion more people, we're going to need to fill that gap that fishing has left. And that's a huge void that is immensely difficult to solve. In fact, you and I are both huge advocates of hydroponics and aquaponics as a more sustainable food source. Yeah, in fact, we have an aquaponics system right next to us. And in fact, today we just had an event where we just taught middle schoolers about hydroponics and aquaponics and how the huge impact of that. And well, there was a huge impact, but that impact cannot overturn the effects of overfishing. And unfortunately, people have this idea that fishing and that the ocean is a never-ending resource. However, we are squeezing that resource dry, and unfortunately, that resource isn't endless. And you might be thinking, well, should we just ban fishing? Of course, with the jobs, we can't do that. And you might be thinking, well, you might like hate your local fishermen, but you gotta think, they're not really the ones that are doing it. It's a big commercial ones. Say a person with a single rod and reel, you can't really overfish, right? You get one fish at a time, you control what you get, not that bad, right? And so like a little farmer in Bangladesh, not a huge impact, but then like a huge commercial trawler, definitely. So that leads to go. Some types of fishing are just worse than others.
So, in totality, not only are the methods of fishing, like large-scale fishing, destructive, but fishing as a whole just seems like a very terrible thing, both now and, prospectively.
Well, fishing itself is good. Fish gives us food, and obviously that's great, right? However, everything has a limit and everything has a balance.
As we've learned from environmental
Exactly, as we learned.
capacity and all of that.
Yeah, exactly. And we are completely offsetting the balance in nature, and it's really easy to destroy, but it's really hard to reinstate. However, you might, and like an example that I would love to use is the Yellowstone National Park.
Oh, yeah.
Remember how they had this huge collapse before, and they introduced 7 wolves, and that's just 7 wolves in the Bronx.
Keystone species.
Exactly, and it completely changed the park. It made it more beautiful, it made it more biodiverse, it made it Yellowstone as we know it today. And it has from 7 wolves. Now think about it like this: if 7 wolves had this huge impact, what's going to happen when millions of species, thousands, if not millions of species are gone? What's going to happen?
It's a frightening thing to acknowledge.
Honestly, we don't even know we don't even have a good scale of sense of what's going to happen. We know that collapse is going to happen, obviously, but we don't know how bad. And overfishing isn't the only issue that the ocean has, right? Like you know a couple of them as an environmental major, right?
Yeah, we have the rising temperatures, ocean acidification. There's a large increase of dead zones recently, like around the reefs. and stuff.
Exactly, and with this, our biodiversity is not just dying just because of climate change, but we're single-handedly forcing the ocean biodiversity down to the ground. And it just, unless we change our methods of fishing, that's just not going to stop anytime soon.
You have any solutions, personally?
Um, Personally, that's really hard to say, but as a little man, you and me, there's not anything we can do. You can be like, hey, let's stop eating fish, but that's not going to change anything. And as I might hear with climate change a lot, you might see all these climate protesters being, we can only do so much. The corporations need to step up. The government needs to step up. And in this case, it's the exact same thing. The little man, you and me, can only do so much compared to these corporations.
Definitely.
Because these corporations are the ones that are single-handedly driving the product. And like, unfortunately, we live in a very capitalistic world where everybody wants the cheapest everything. Oh, 1 second. And
This is going to be unedited. Yay!
and with everybody wanting something cheap, right? We always turn to technology. We get the cheapest, and technology lets us do so much for so cheap.
But at what expense?
Exactly. And in our instance, commercial fishing it's so efficient, right? Like as an engineer, I have to say it is super efficient. But as an engineer, I must also say everything looks good if you turn your back to the negatives, right? If you put on a rose-colored lens, everything seems great.
Sounds
right?
like a general truth, too.
Yeah, exactly. It is a general truth, and so as an environmental, as a self-proclaimed environmentalist, I have to point out, while it's so efficient, it is so damn bad for the environment. So we have a method of fishing called trawl netting, right? What a trawl net is, it's a huge net, and they have weights at the bottom to sink this net in the ground. And what they do is they just pull it with the huge tugboats, and it catches everything in its way. It doesn't literally everything that fits in the net it catches whales, tuna, salmons, whatever big fish you can think of, whales, sharks, dolphins, whatever the hell you think.
Think about that.
Catches
You know that
everything.
most whales are pretty large. Even the smallest whale is
Exactly.
definitely a large.
And not just that, these weights that drag them to the ground, these weights are dragged through seabeds, through coral reefs, through anything. And it destroys the seabed. It completely disturbs them, it unsettles them, kills the corals, kills anything attached to the ground.
And as you
shakes the
know,
ground.
reefs are also like thousands of years in the making.
And exactly, reefs are thousands of years in the making, and reefs, they're getting hit pretty hard on their own, even without this trawl netting. Due to due to climate change, they're already hit super hard by some things such as bleaching, right? Bleaching, it's killing these corals, and now we're just like, you know what? Let's kill some more. And it's terrible because most of the fish we eat is trawl netted. I hate it, but that's just the general truth. And I guess it's an up and coming solution, which would be aquaculture, right? Or farm food and aquaculture. It might be like man-made ponds or reservoirs that you're breeding these fish in, as you would know. In fact, you're the one who told me about them. And or in some instances, they have big nets in the ocean. Which, going back to the nets in the ocean thing, not so great. Actually, fun fact: plastic nets in the ocean are one of the biggest, I think, if not the largest source of plastic that's in the ocean. It's just leftover nets from fishermen.
That sounds unsurprising given what you've told me so
Yeah,
far.
no, it definitely isn't surprising at all. And then so aquaculture, they use the huge nets and they just keep the fish in there and they just farm them in there. And oh, you might be thinking that sounds great. It is pretty good, right? Like obviously farming is 100 times more sustainable than wild catching, especially in mass quantities. However, going back to the thing we just talked about the capitalistic world thing. In a capitalistic world where money drives change and everything, you want to make as much money as possible. So you're putting as many fish as possible in those tiny nets. And the only thing is, you might be thinking, hey, you're putting this net in the ocean, right? The water is going to stay consistent everywhere in the ocean, right? That's not quite the case. Because you're putting so much in one area, that area is so polluted with fish waste. It's not healthy for the fish at all. And in turn, it's very, very likely not healthy for us either.
Oh.
So that's in a sense why overfishing is so. That is why in a sense a lot of people are like, "Hey, wild caught fish are so good." And that's why you see like Gordon Ramsay being like, "This is not wild caught." Fuck. Yeah. So except only thing is like, sure it might taste better, but also you know what?
The ramifications.
Want to know what tastes better than fish? I want to know what doesn't taste better than fish?
What?
No fish at all,
Oh.
right? So you gotta like outweigh the cons a little bit in this instance, right?
But I'm curious about something about aquaculture, right? What do you suppose would happen if one fish in this, seaside farm happened to get sick? Parasites.
See, exactly. These fish are so concentrated. If one thing has it, they all have it, right? And that's just a huge problem because all these treatments that they're gonna end up using to treat these fish, it's in the ocean. It's gonna disperse. It's gonna affect the local wildlife, local ecosystems, and that's just really bad. And it's just crazy how profound that effects of overfishing are. And, but this is just, we're talking about the effects of overfishing on the ocean. We're not talking a little bit about the effects of overfishing on just the world in general.
Go for it.
So, well, we did talk about economic danger, right? What about food? Obviously, we talked a little bit about food. Want to talk about it a bit more?
Wait, there is something I would like to bring up though, that some regions of the world are actually opposed to some solution for overfishing because it's a cultural thing. Like, forgive me because I don't know exactly where, but there's several European countries that depend on, like I said, I don't know the European country, probably has to fact check that later, that depend on, the catching of whales seasonally, as like a little traditional thing, and for food, source of food over the winter.
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, I've known this is an issue that I've seen personally that I think is kind of funny. Well, not even funny, it's ironic in a little way for some people. Obviously we're on social media a lot more. A lot of people are able to show off their cultures more, and one notable one is like Eskimo culture. And if you didn't know, Eskimos, they do eat like blubber and whale, right? Because that's a traditional food source and they have it. If you think about it, this one whale is a food source for plenty of people for months. So them catching one whale and eating it for let's say 3, 4, 5 months. Let's not be too generous. Call it 4 months, right? So they need three whales a year for a large amount of people. That's way less whales than we're killing from bycatch. So people be like, "Oh, how do you eat whales? Whales are already endangered." And they sit down for a nice salmon dinner, and then they're like, "Hey, I'm just saying, a whole lot of whales died because of that one salmon dinner." So yeah, exactly. It's super ironic because they're quick to blame others, but not quick to blame themselves. And in this instance, I can't blame them, as the education always isn't there. which is sort of why we're discussing this, right?
Yeah. Because to address overfishing, you first have to address several societal issues already.
Yeah, exactly. And plus, with like in this instance, you can see like directly catching a whale that's endangered. That's an immediate problem that you see immediately, right? Because it's transparent. But with like, cause this it's a single step thing. Whale endangered, you're eating whale. So obviously that's leading to more endangered problems, right? However, with like salmon, you're eating salmon. You're not seeing that there's a whale. You haven't heard of the whale because they don't put it in the label. And you don't hear about the whale unless somebody like me yells at you about it. And so you don't think about it because there's so many other steps involved, and that just, unfortunately, the general world we live in, we don't really question our food sources. And like, some people nowadays just think food comes from the store, not like, like the environment or whatever, or the farm. They don't really think about that anymore. And well, obviously it makes sense why, because the world's gotten really convenient, right? And I love that about the world. Right? I wouldn't want to go farming. I wouldn't want to go hunting. Like, I wouldn't survive a day, right? So it's great, but we got to be like, a bit more mindful about it because it's just really rough on the environment. So, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Think I should eat less fish?
Well, again, that's not really a solid thing because you and I, the little man, there's only so little that people can do about eating less fish. So
Want to go grab something with fish afterwards?
it's more of like an institutional problem than it is just, hey, it's like an individual problem. Like even with something like recycling, for example, I'm just drawing some parallels, right? With recycling, if I recycle, that's great. If you recycle, that's great. But what change does that make? But like, right, think about it in the long term. I told you, right, the number one source of plastic in the ocean, it's not plastic bottles. It's not plastic cups. It's plastic nets from overfishing. Because a lot of times, if nets get caught, they're not putting the effort to fucking pull it back. They're just gonna cut it off. Forget about it. Out of sight, out of mind, as they do with the bycatch over the edge, right?
But doesn't the movement start with the individuals like us?
Exactly. The movement starts from the individuals like us. However, by eating less fish, you're not doing anything. But you just have to drive the big corporations to make the change. You have to have politicians make this change. You and I ourselves aren't going to do anything, and that's sort of apparent. There's been climate change protests for God, how long now?
We've attended a few.
Forever. Yeah, exactly. We've attended a couple. We've spoke at climate change events, and has anything huge really happened?
Nope.
The only thing that's really happened is this more awareness, but we have to get these politicians to change. And protests are only doing so much, and a lot of people are growing frustrated. That's kind of in a sense why you see like these a lot of these huge protests in like the Europe, where they're like throwing paint on like famous things, which I don't 100% agree with, but I get what they do because they're just trying to drive public outrage. That way, more and more people see it, and they're more likely to do something about it so it stops. Which, again, I don't agree with the methods, but I agree with the principle, right? Methods are definitely questionable because I don't know if throwing orange paint at Van Gogh is Van Gogh painting is a great idea, but thankfully the paintings aren't damaged because all these big famous paintings have a layer of protective glass right in front of painting, so paintings are okay. So if you see a painting of just Van Gogh's famous sunflowers getting thrown orange paint on them, don't worry, that painting's still okay.
What if Van Gogh ate a lot of fish?
Well, Van Gogh also existed before a time where overfishing was a problem, so yeah. Let's see. We talked about economic issues, we talked about environmental issues, solutions. Is there anything else you think we can talk about overfishing? Oh, maybe let's talk about aquaponics. So aquaponics is debatably
sustainable agriculture.
Exactly, and it's a little bit of a hybrid between obviously aquaculture, aquaculture and something like horticulture or agriculture, and it's a little bit of both, because aquaponics uses a system where there's fish down here and plants up here, obviously, and they work in a symbiotic relationship. The waste produced by the fish are taken up by the plants, and the plants use that to grow, and in turn, because the plants take up the waste, the fish have a cleaner environment to live in. And so in this instance, in a lot of commercial instances at least, aquaponically grown fish, namely tilapia, because tilapia are so hardy to grow and they grow really fast and they're a pretty good food source. A lot of people eat tilapia. Like my mom loves tilapia.
Carp, which are, probably equally as hardy. Tilapia just tastes better.
Yeah, exactly, for sure. And because of that, you can grow vegetables and fish in one system. And in fact, I'll tell you a cool story. I've got a friend who's made his own aquaponics unit to save money on food. It's super cool. He has One, he has a tilapia unit, and then he has a bed. Instead of like a tub, like he has multiple two beds that are run off the tilapia unit. It's so cool because he also has, in before the beds, he has it's called a barrel sediment filter. The water is pushed into the barrel, but then there's a splitter that pushes them in a circular motion. So any solid waste falls to the bottom, and then it overflows into the next unit. So all solid waste collected in one system. So it's super easy to clean, super easy to maintain. And he built this all by himself. And I'm not saying that this is obviously a solution for overfishing, because obviously we live in New York. Ain't no way we're going to be able to create anything even close to big enough for that. But it's just really cool, isn't it? It's just like how it is. It's not just like a one-dimensional problem. It's not like, hey, little Timmy fell down the stairs, let's get him an ice pack. It's more so like, little Timmy fell down the stairs, broke half the bone in his body, now needs to get 5 different surgeries. And so we just gotta like, there's a ton of different like things that need to work together to be a solution. Obviously, it can't only just be politicians doing XXX, right? So it needs to be more than that. It needs to be politicians doing this, and then corporations working along with it, and then people. Because a big thing about this, and you and I, as both engineers, and we know that teamwork is huge, right? Teamwork drives change. It makes things faster. It makes things better. So it can't just only be politicians working. It can't be only corporations doing it. It just the people, the corporations, the government. We all have to work together in this. Because if you think about it in a way, this is not just our planet. It's not just the government's planet. It's not just the corporation's planet. It's all of our planet. So if this planet is suffering and is on the brink of collapse, it's exactly. Corporations aren't going to make any more money. We're not going to be able to live. Governments aren't going to be able to govern, right? So, no one likes that. First of all, nobody likes anarchy. First of all, I guess I know a certain pig, but
as you said earlier, the extent of greed goes beyond that, where people are willing to do all these.
Exactly, and unfortunately, I think that a big driver of change in this instance is going to be not greed, but total failed, outright catastrophe. Because I think what's going to happen is.
But at that point, wouldn't things just be completely irreversible?
See, that's what I'm afraid of in a way. Because if you think about it, have you seen the movie Don't Look Up?
I've been meaning to.
Exactly. In that movie, I'm sorry for the spoiler, by the way.
No. Oh man.
Okay, I'll just give you a rundown. It's not a spoiler. People were ignoring this issue until they saw this issue right in front of their face. But by then, there was nothing they could do but sit back and accept it. And I'm not saying that obviously we're going to get hit by an asteroid anytime soon, but the issue is, it's in the blurb. That wasn't a spoiler. It's on the cover. And so I'm just afraid that this driver of change is going to be this fact that, like, hey, maybe the environment's going to collapse.
A cataclysmic event.
Exactly. People are only going to realize what's wrong once catastrophe hits. And that's just, if you think about it like right now, right? Climate change. You and I know it exists. In fact, it's December right now, and I can walk outside with a sweater and it'll be fine. Yeah, it's mid-December, no snow.
And the scary thing is that several scientists have already gone forward and be like, we're at the point where it's almost irreversible.
Yeah, exactly.
And yet there's no change being done.
Thing is, it's not just the fact that there's not change being done. There's people who don't believe in it. And worse, there's politicians who don't believe in it. The people who we're relying on to make the change, in some instances, don't believe in this problem. And they're not going to solve a problem that they don't believe exists. This is hugely problematic, right?
This reminds me of that old quote. It goes something, I mean, it's not verbatim, but it goes something alongside of, indifference does nothing but benefit the aggressor.
Exactly, right? And so, by these, like, them doing nothing or just them being idiots, in this instance, because I truly feel like they are, it's not helping anybody. In fact, it's making things so much worse for all of us. And if they're not going to do anything about climate change, you best believe they're not going to do anything about overfishing, because overfishing compared to climate changes almost seems like a mundane issue, albeit it's not, because we both understand the depths of overfishing. But like to like the everyday people, you might think climate change, and you hear climate change, and you're like, that's bad, right? You hear overfishing, you're like, that's pretty bad. That's bad, right? But you're not like, oh god, that's really bad. So, because, for example, you and I have attended climate change protests, climate change meetings. How many overfishing protests have there been? How many overfishing meetings have there been?
Not that I've heard of.
I've never heard of any either, and that's a little bit of an issue if you like ask me, right? Because like, obviously it's like, and so at that point, what that is an issue of is just the fact that there's not enough awareness or just not enough knowledge. Because actually, the fun thing is, we know more about outer space than we do about the ocean, which is a little bit of a scary thing to think about.
As a claustrophobic person, it's definitely scary. But let's
Yeah.
go back to overfishing.
And so there's just so many problems that are going to be come up of just us not doing anything, and these problems aren't getting worse. I mean, these problems are actually getting worse, but it's being these problems, the negative effects are being sped up by the fact that the human population is growing so fast, and that's one of the big problems about humans. Because we hear about invasive species a lot, right? And there's no worse invasive species than humans.
I'm glad you said
Like
that.
a lot of people don't acknowledge that. People hear invasive species, they might think of spotted lanternflies, they might think of lionfish or sea urchins. There's a lot of invasive species, right? But we are single-handedly the worst because we're the only invasive species that has the ability to change, to help heal the earth and also to completely destroy it at the same time. And again, just tying back into sustainability, it is our job as just people to leave the earth sustainable for the next generation. And one thing, my biggest fear is the fact that the politicians are completely indifferent to that. They don't seem to care, and they don't seem to want to do anything about it.
And I like that you said that they don't seem to care, because it's not as if they don't understand the issue, that they deliberately choose not to do anything about it.
Exactly, and by just choosing not to do anything about it, it shows that you don't care. And if you don't care, who else is going to? And that's why, in a way, I'm kind of glad we're having the younger Gen Z voters starting to enter the voting pool, because as far as I know, most of them are pretty aware of a lot of these environmental issues. They're on social media a lot. They're able to read up on it. They're able to find this information. Because thankfully, we live in the informational era, and so they're able to find all this info, and they're definitely thinking about it more. So,
and like you said, the frustration is an all-time high, and we have the ability to be vocal and outspoken about it.
yeah, exactly. And social media gives us a platform to present these ideas, to show off these ideas, and just to make our voices loud. And just like we did today, right? We talked to a lot of people. We talked to middle schoolers. We inspired. We talked to them about sustainability and how they can help make the future better. We didn't talk about overfishing per se, but by opening up their eyes to one aspect of sustainability, that makes a huge difference. Because if they realize that, hey, there's other things that aren't sustainable, and these other things are causing just as much issues as what we learned today, they're going to be feeling inclined to solve those as well, right? Because once they realize, hey, it's doable, hey, we are the voice, we are the change, we are the future, right? It drives a huge amount of change. And so we need that change to be vocalized, and we need that change to just happen. And in our instance, that change is, I think, is starting to happen, but it is slow. But I truly do believe that the Gen Z voters are going to have a huge part to do with it. And the only thing is, but that's only in the United States, these Gen Z, obviously these Gen Z voters elsewhere, but
yeah,
we can't be so sure that they have the same knowledge as we do, because obviously we went to Brooklyn Tech, right? We're alumni of Brooklyn Tech. We had a lot of resources to learn, right? And in fact, no lab, a lot of schools are lucky to have air conditioners. We have multiple of those, and we have so much science, scientific information. We have the ability to do all this. But other schools, especially in more so impoverished areas, they don't have anywhere close to similar quality of education. I mean, we live in New York, which has pretty good quality of education. But then if you can think of something like Alabama, which is number 50 in education, and I'm just saying it's 50 states, so being number 50 is pretty bad. All right, so not looking towards my friend in Alabama, but I'm not saying he's not the brightest, but
But what you said earlier, right? That we have a platform, and being in the U.S., freedom of speech is definitely a thing. Some countries don't have that. If you were to be outspoken about this overfishing, especially if it was an integral part of the economy and the culture and everything like that, you might face some serious repercussions.
You best believe in China, if you say something the government ain't they're gonna do something about it. Because you've already seen what they've been doing for the quarantine camps.
Yeah.
They've been tossing people into quarantine camps. I'm just saying, quarantine sounds awfully similar to concentration.
Man.
But
I guess being frustrated about it shows our interest.
Exactly. Being frustrated about it shows our passion, our interest, and hopefully it leads others to just believe, right? And we've established our credibility a little bit. We're Brooklyn Tech alumni, we're environmental science majors, and we're self-advocating environmental science majors. We do, of course, we talk to middle schoolers, we do given presentations, and now we're doing this podcast. And so you and I both love teaching, you and I both love showing off what the world has to hold for us if we can take care of it. And so I think that you and I just even doing this talk can be super helpful as long as people can see it. And thankfully, social media does give us that platform. Social media also gives us the platform for all the hate and misinformation, which doesn't help us. And obviously, these flat earthers, there's climate deniers, and all this that's we're actively working against us. But we just gotta push harder than they are. So.
We gotta be the one. Us two specifically.
Yeah, exactly. It's us. It's
Overfishing
us two
is
making
us.
it. Yeah. Overfishing ends with us.
No, we can do. Okay, you're gonna edit this part, but we have to make it better. All right, us two specifically, man.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Alright.
and it's not even just. No, it's just like a bit of a joke, right? That's not obviously not just gonna be me and Sean who drive this shit. It's gonna
Hey,
be
man,
all
you don't
of
know.
us. It could be, but you know, it's gonna be all of us to make a change. And so, so whoever stuck around this long to our pretty long and boring seeming conversation, I hope you guys learned a lot because we did go over a lot of information. A lot of information that I learned recently, some that you even learned. And me and Shamrik, we both obviously knew a lot before we came into this conversation, but I can
But there's
confidently,
always more to learn.
I can confidently say after this talk, I learned a lot more, and I think you would agree to that. You also
Definitely.
learned. Yeah, and that's obviously what social media does. It gives us a platform to share knowledge, and hopefully people are able to just share and just get better and help us solve our world. Yeah.
Nice talking with you, man.
Yeah, nice talking.